From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Ted Nesi will join me on the second half. Some updated revenue projections for the state came out recently, and as you can imagine, they are grim. Here to talk about crafting a state budget during a pandemic is State Senate Majority Leader Michael McCaffrey. Leader, it's good to have you on the program, and I want to dive right into that topic. You know, those budget numbers are stark. Rhode Island is facing an $800 million shortfall. And look, potential help from the federal government aside, let's shelve that because that is no sure thing. How do you even approach getting your arms around this massive gap?
Well, we had the revenue estimating conference that came in with those numbers, and they're terrible numbers. And I've been on a conference call with other majority leaders recently, and all the states in the New England region are in the same position. Hopefully the federal government is going to provide additional aid or lessen the restrictions on the CARES money that we received. And obviously Jack Reed did a fantastic job in getting us $1.25 billion along with the other members of the congressional delegation. And hopefully there's something we can do with that. But I mean, everyone's going to have to, we're going to look at everything to see where we can tighten our belts and what we have to do to try and balance this budget as best we can.
Well, there are so many strings attached to that $1.25 billion, Leader, as you know, so likely not all of it can be used to close that gap. Let's talk about what's potentially on the table. Are we talking about the possibility of an increase in state revenue through things like sales tax, income tax, or the gas tax?
I would say everything is on the table, and we heard the governor the other day mention the possibility of furloughs and things of that nature. So there's no one answer that's going to fill this hole. Only thing I will say that is not on the table, I will not vote for an expansion of the tolls beyond the trucks. I mean, other than that, I think we're going to look at everything. We're going to have to tighten our belts. We're going to have to ask the cities and towns to tighten their belts also. I mean, and
I got to ask you, Leader, just that you brought up the tolls might freak some people out going, wait a minute, was that even a discussion? Is that something that you're hearing could be a possibility, is expanding the use of tolls to increase revenue?
I don't, my position is I'm not going to vote if there is a push to increase the tolls. I mean, obviously, they were put in for purposes of trucking to repair roads, and that's the way it's going to stay. We always hear people saying, well, you're going to expand the tolls. There's no intention to expand the tolls at this point in time.
All right. Do you want the governor to submit an entire new budget right now, or would you rather just work with the one that she submitted prior to this pandemic and sort of hack it up? What would you like to see?
Well, what I can say is that the governor's office is working with the Senate and the House during this whole pandemic process, and hopefully, and I think we will be able to continue to work together going forward. I mean, the governor's been in a difficult situation and has done a fantastic job. I mean, she appears to be doing the right things at the right time, and is always saying, I'm willing to review things in the future. And I think that we all have to work collaboratively together to get through this situation that we're in, so that we can move forward and the future be a better state.
I want to talk a little bit about the governor and how she's been approaching the pandemic in a bit, but just sticking to your branch right now and what you are all facing over there. Is outside their budget, is there any legislation that must be dealt with this session, or is it just all budget all the time and everything else got to wait till next year?
Well, I mean, we passed a number of pieces of legislation in the Senate early this session, so we were fortunate in that regards. We will be looking at legislation that city and towns will need for bonding and things of that nature, and other legislation that's pertinent to the running of the state of Rhode Island. Obviously, we'll take a look at and pass if we have to pass. But no doubt about it, the budget is the biggest bill that we're going to address when we come back into session, and we're already starting to address it. We had the Joint Commission that met. The House Finance Committee met last week, and I know that the House Fiscal Office and Finance Committee is being updated on a regular basis as to what the numbers are and projections and things of that nature.
Leader McCaffrey, you have been up there for a long time. I think it's safe to say you've never seen anything like this. And I've just a quick question on process. You know, the business of legislating is being impacted like everything else during the pandemic. How is the Senate going to actually convene as there are so many restrictions right now?
Well, I know that we're researching and reaching out to different national legislative organizations to see what different legislative bodies are doing during this pandemic time. At some point in time, we're going to have to get together at least to amend our rules or suspend our rules in one form or another so that we could maybe potentially go to some other form of meeting if we have to do that.
And what about voting? Would remote voting be on the table? As you point out, there are some rules. You have to have a quorum in order to do some proxy voting and things like that. Are remote and proxy voting, are those things that you're looking at?
Right now, the legal counsel for the Senate is researching all those areas to see what different states are doing, what we can do. But at some point, we're going to have to come in one form or another to start the process so that we can move forward efficiently during the legislative process to vote on a budget. Our budget year ends on June 30th, and we have to have a budget in place on July 1st.
That is required constitutionally. And speaking of constitutional, you know, I told you I wanted to talk about this. You lauded the governor for her performance so far during the pandemic. But you're a lawyer, and I want to take you back. Don't break out into a cold sweat here, Leader. I want to take you back to law school and your constitutional law class. You know, former State Supreme Court Justice Robert Flanders has said the governor has taken her executive authority a little bit too far during the pandemic, and some of her decisions have impinged on certain freedoms. Are you comfortable with how she has operated so far, or do you think the power between the executive branch and yours is a bit out of whack right now?
I'm comfortable with the way the governor has performed during this pandemic. She's been in constant contact with the Senate President. In addition, we have regular meetings of the leaders of the House and Senate with the governor's staff, where they inform us of what's going on and what they anticipate and how they anticipate doing it. And I think we do need one leader in this situation so that we're focused and going in the right direction. And on a daily basis, she's updating us and saying she's willing to change things. Obviously, us as legislators are getting calls from different businesses saying, I need my business open, I want my business open. Can you help us to move forward with that? And you're getting calls from people who are having to go back to work and have young children. They're saying, you know, my children are in daycare, the daycares are open. Those are all things that the governor's office is balancing and thinking what's best for the state of Rhode Island. The numbers that we have in the state of Rhode Island are very good numbers with respect to the testing and how the governor's been controlling things, and I think that's important. I was on a call yesterday with different majority leaders, and they were impressed by the way that the state of Rhode Island numbers are, in addition to the way that the state of Rhode Island is so aggressive in the DLT and getting the people their payments and the systems working. Granted that it's not working fast enough for all the citizens, but overall the system for DLT is working very good.
I want to take a pause on the topic of the pandemic right now, and I just want to dive briefly into politics. I have to with you on the program. And I got to ask you about this. Providence City Council Majority Leader Joanne Ryan this week announced a high-profile challenge to incumbent Democratic Senator Sam Bell. I think it's safe to say Senator Bell has been a thorn in your side as part of the leadership team. Are you supporting Ryan?
Well, what I can say is that Sam Bell didn't vote for me as majority leader, has donated a substantial sum of money to the opponent who's running against me. So I'm going to be supporting Councilwoman Ryan.
All right, and assuming you are not planning an overthrow of the Senate President right now, Leader, should that seat become available, is that something you would consider?
I certainly would consider it. I certainly would consider it.
And what is part of that decision making? What is the thing that you're balancing when you're considering taking on a major leadership role like that, which comes with a ton of responsibility?
I'm 110% behind President Ruggiero, and whatever his plans are, I'm going to follow whatever he wants to do. I mean, I think he's doing a good job. He's got a good handle of things, and he's treating all the members fairly.
I have to ask you about this. We learned this morning that 2 ex-lawmakers were released from prison recently, and I'm talking to you on a Friday morning. A lot of people are watching this on a Sunday. Ex-lawmakers Ray Gallison and your former Senate colleague Jamie Doyle were both released from prison early. We don't know as we tape this program as to why and if the pandemic had anything to do with it, but as I said, you served with Jamie Doyle, and I wonder if you have any thoughts now on his release from federal prison.
Well, I mean, obviously, Jamie was at a low point in his life, and he accepted responsibility, and he moved forward. I wish him and his family well, and I'm sure he's going to make out all right he's going to turn out all right in the future. He's accepted responsibility for what he did.
I want to wrap up our conversation, Leader, with going back to the pandemic. You talked about the calls that your office is receiving from people, from businesses who are really feeling it right now, from parents who say, I can't go back to work because the daycare centers are closed or my kids are still in school. There's a lot of things going on right now. As Rhode Island is dipping its toes back into reopening sooner than its neighbors, we should point out, in the Northeast, are you comfortable with the governor's approach and timeline so far, or do you think it's too soon or not fast enough?
I think the governor's using an approach that is fair and reasonable, and she's saying if the numbers get better, I'll speed up the process. If we have a little bump in the road, I'll have to review it and maybe slow down the process. I mean, we don't want to open up all the doors and then get into a big mess where the numbers start to go through the roof. I think the most important thing is that we take care of the health and safety of all the citizens of Rhode Island.
Senate Majority Leader Michael McCaffrey, really good to have you on the program. Thanks so much for joining us.
Take care and stay healthy.
All right, and when we come back, Eyewitness News politics and business editor Ted Nesi joins me live from the State House to talk about this week in news. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me live from the Rhode Island State House, as he does every week, is Eyewitness News politics and business editor Ted Nesi. Ted, it's good to see you again. Just want to break down a couple of things from our first half interview with Senate Majority Leader Michael McCaffrey. Clearly it's budget, nothing else. It doesn't sound like we're going to see really any other bills there when I asked him about that. And boy, one thing that sort of came out of left field, at least for me, was he said, and by the way, we are not expanding tolling in Rhode Island to help cover the shortfalls, the revenue shortfalls we have here. And I said, wait a minute, is that something that's being discussed? That was sort of surprising to me. What was behind that, do you think?
Yeah, I thought that was interesting too, Tim, and I was surprised as well. But to me, that is evidence of just how often these lawmakers hear that concern from their constituents. I mean, you and I get that question all the time from viewers. They see the gantries go up for the truck tolling program, and many people think, no matter how many times Speaker Mattiello, Leader McCaffrey, the governor say that will not be extended to passenger cars, they think, oh, it's a matter of time. So I think, clearly that's been said to him enough. He felt the need to really spell it out right here. I think you can tell when something is coming through from the constituents when you hear it right from the lawmakers.
And going to the other topic there, again, it sounds like it's just going to be all of their bandwidth to deal with the budget shortfall right now. If you're someone who doesn't have an interest in the budget, but you might have an interest in a bill that's outside the budget, that was probably not a very good interview to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I'm already hearing frustrations, Tim, from some of the advocacy groups advocating on other issues. They have, for example, the firearms control groups that say they want new restrictions and have been working hard on various bills for years. I think they're seeing the writing on the wall. Not to mention that issue is always a heavy lift anyway because there's such strong feelings around it, and other folks as well who think more needs to be done. I'm hearing from both the House and the Senate side that really, to them, the budget this year is such a collapse colossal and difficult undertaking. And there's also, as my understanding is, there's just safety concerns about bringing lawmakers up here, how often they should all be in hearing rooms. We had House Finance last night. It was the first normal committee meeting in about 2 months, and you didn't have the press in the room, you didn't have the public in the room. All the members were wearing masks. They were spread out at all different tables. So I think part of it is also just a feeling that it's very hard to do normal legislating in this environment.
And you heard the leader say there that they are looking at amending the rules as they look to reconvene or convene at all during this pandemic. I got to ask you too, I mean, in some ways during an election year, isn't this much easier for the lawmakers to just deal with the budget, which is probably a landmine in itself, but not have to deal with those hot button issues that you rattled off? That helps them in some ways, the incumbents.
Absolutely, Tim. I mean, you can set your watch to it that, in even numbered years when there's an election, the lawmakers try to avoid major controversial issues that they don't know how their voters will feel when they get to the doorsteps this fall. And then odd numbered years is usually when they tackle the things that they hope that passions will cool by the time the election comes around. So already this was going to be a year where there was going to be some hesitation about tough votes, controversial issues, but I think they feel exponentially more that way because of the situation they're in now. And
speaking of elections, Ted, when we ask if someone's going to endorse someone within a party, a primary battle, usually, the politicians will say, well, it's too early for that, or they don't want to endorse in a primary battle. Not the case here with Leader McCaffrey saying he will endorse City Councilwoman Joanne Ryan against who I described as a thorn in the side to Leader McCaffrey, the incumbent state senator Sam Bell. What's behind that relationship?
Yeah, well, Senator Bell, he's long been one of the most, vocal progressives in Rhode Island, and he has never shied away from, frontal criticism and of the sort of Democratic leadership structure in the General Assembly. And, there are costs to that. Bell, of course, thinks, A, that he's correct, and B, that, he's advocating for the policies he believes in, but, that has made him enemies. And clearly, Joanne Ryan is going to have strong support from the leadership in the Senate in this challenge. But of course, you can't rule Sam Bell out. There's a reason he won pretty handily in the primary in 2018. He represents a portion of the west side of Providence, and I think you're going to see him really organize hard, and I think that's going to be a really interesting election to watch in the coming months. As you
touched on, you covered the House Finance, I think that was Thursday night, I believe. And, you described what it was like to cover that. It's all very different. But from just a budget perspective, what were your takeaways from that?
I had kind of, first of all, there's a huge amount of uncertainty still, which is nerve-wracking for all the people who have to write the budget when there's only, 6 weeks left in the fiscal year. But I'd say I have two big takeaways. They know a huge amount of revenue, roughly $800 million over 2 years, is not actually going to come in. That's not exactly what the deficit will be because stuff changes on the spending side, but you can say there's a huge hole in the current budget and the one that's coming up. And then also, on the flip side, there's a huge amount of federal money coming in. We've all heard about the $1.25 billion for coronavirus aid that Rhode Island got in the CARES Act. There's hundreds of millions of dollars and other things for testing in the Department of Health and Education and RIPTA. But the question, of course, is how much will that federal money match up in ways that can cover what has been lost? Because you can't just take that federal money and apply it to all the revenue that's not coming in. The picture it's just very murky right now. It's clearly challenging and not going to be easy, but you also don't know if a lot of that federal money can offset a bunch of the revenue losses by plugging holes with education and things. Maybe it's not quite as bad as it looks, and they just don't know enough yet to say that. Plus, they're, as you heard, waiting for Congress. Will Congress provide more aid to states? And that too is very unclear right now.
Well, why don't we answer that? Have you try and answer the very question you posed, which is, will Congress provide more aid? There's been a couple of bills down there they're talking about for another round of stimulus, and part of that may be to help bail out state and municipal budgets. What are the chances of that happening?
I think you've heard very mixed signals. Obviously, the Democrats are pretty much lockstep in agreement that more aid for states and cities is necessary. Congressman Cicilline says the HEROES Act that the House was planning to vote on Friday as we tape this would be well over $1 billion more for Rhode Island, the state, and then plenty more for the cities and towns as well. But the Republicans in the Senate say that bill is a non-starter with them. However, look at the retail numbers today, look at the unemployment numbers. I have to think that just about every state budget in the country, if not all 50, are going to be challenged, which means while it might sound like a red state, blue state thing in Washington, you might see these Republican senators and congressmen start to think they need to find more money even if they represent a more Republican-leaning state. So that's the real question. How much pressure to the Senate Republicans, who generally represent red states in the Senate, feel to come up with more money to help state budgets? And I think a lot of that will depend on what they're hearing from their states.
But don't we have a preview of that, Ted, from what's happening in the House? It sounds like at least one of the bills is strictly on party lines right now.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? But on the other hand, a lot of the Republicans in the House maybe don't want to give Nancy Pelosi a win. The bill is not endorsed by President Trump. Frankly, Leader McConnell has said the Pelosi's bill, the HEROES Act, is going nowhere in the Senate. So the Republicans say this is a message bill. We don't need to take it seriously. So again, I do think the other thing is, part of why there's a self-interest piece to Congress putting up money to help states and cities. Yes, part of it is just to plug holes, and because if you don't help, there'll be teacher layoffs and things like that. But it's also because, if you suddenly throw state budgets into chaos and the states start to make deep cuts, you could exacerbate the recession because you'll have, people losing jobs or at least furloughed. If a state or city worker is furloughed, just like a private sector worker, they're probably going to spend less money. They're not going to go out to eat. They're not, if they're allowed to, And so there was a Wall Street Journal piece the other day saying part of the reason to do it is because the economy can't take any more contraction right now. So I think that's another piece you're going to have to look at, is just how Republican leaders are feeling about the economic outlook in the coming weeks. But again, the other thing is they don't have to do it on Rhode Island's timeline, right? They could wait a while to do this.
Right. Well, and this brings up the shameless plug portion of Newsmakers. Ted, you and I are hosting a congressional town hall Tuesday night live at 7 o'clock. You and I will be talking to all 4 members of Rhode Island's federal delegation. You'll be nicely back in the studio, social distancing. They will be via Zoom, and we'll be taking in questions from our viewers through 12 Responds on WPRI.com. Obviously, this is going to be the big topic at hand, Ted, as we talk to them. But we're going to have a full hour there. What are you going to be listening for from the members of the delegation Tuesday night at 7 o'clock?
Well, one thing is hazard pay for nurses, for frontline workers in grocery stores and things like that. We get that question. Tim, we get that question a lot from viewers about whether Congress will do something there. I'm also just curious, how quickly they think things can return to more normal, and how long they feel the crisis is going to last. And also, we're hearing conflicting things on some of the policies they've already adopted. The PPP loan program for small businesses, you need to bring your workers back for that. But we've talked to businesses who say, yeah, but my workers are doing better on unemployment right now because of the $600 boost. Now, on the progressive side, you have people say, well, then you should pay them more. But those businesses say, well, I just don't have the revenue to raise wages to the level that unemployment plus the 600 is doing. So, kind of that question, too, about whether the policies put in place so far have done what they meant to do, and kind of what their answer is to folks struggling to figure that out.
All right, Nesi, don't give away too much. You don't want them to see a preview of the questions. All right, switching gears with 2 minutes left here, Ted. This week we saw a change to the governor's daily briefing. As our viewers will remember, we had to submit our questions previously remotely. They'd ask one question, but now it's being held at the vets, and reporters they're allowed in there wearing masks and all that. And we have some video of that on the screen right now, Ted. We're showing it to folks. How's that been going so far as someone who's been in the room?
I think it's going pretty well. I think obviously reporters wanted to be back in the room to ask their questions directly. I think anyone who's been watching those briefings regularly or just tuning in once in a while would note that, you can see why. I think you see that if a question isn't answered as specifically as a reporter wanted, they can pipe right up with a follow-up question. They can press for answers. I also think it reins in maybe the speechifying by the governor and the health director a little bit. And I think I have to give credit to our co-chief photographer, Corey Welch, who's who's been here at the State House and over there every day throughout this crisis for the independent media outlets so that it's not all Capitol TV. But yeah, I think it's, is it different? Yes. Is it a little weird to have a mask on in a theater asking the governor questions spaced out from your fellow reporters? Yes. But, I do think we're all having to find new ways to do things and try to keep what's important, which is direct reporter-politician contact, while also abiding by public health guidelines. So hopefully it's a way to have that while keeping everybody healthy and safe.
And 30 seconds left, Ted, for folks watching this weekend on Sunday morning. They will not see a briefing over the weekend, correct?
That's right. This is the first weekend without weekend briefings, a sign I think the governor, her office said we want to give you, the reporters, as well as the public, their weekends back. And again, I think it's a sort of effort to ease the crisis feeling and get back to some new version of normalcy.
All right, Ted Nesi, thanks so much. And don't forget to tune in Tuesday night at 7 o'clock here on Channel 12 for our Congressional Town Hall. For Ted Nesi, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.